What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Thomas, once again bringing you another edition of the Thomas Take. In case you did not tune in to part one, I just wrapped up with that. Talked about the legacy, the fight legacy, the fighter legacy of Manny Pacquiao, bidding him a farewell or a thank you if this is the end for Manny Pacquiao. The crusty asshole that is Bob Arum, pardon my French, will not probably give him a rematch with Jeff Horn, from what I've read and from what I had seen last night during the Pacquiao-Horn press conference. I can't stand Bob Arum. I can't stand boxing, to be quite honest with you at this point. I'm completely done with it. I don't want to go into too much detail, but wanted to get to the subject matter of part two of today's show, where I'm talking about the one consistent problem with boxing and MMA. Reffing, the referees in both MMA and boxing, and, of course, the judging. So, last night, ESPN obviously had Manny Pacquiao on primetime with Jeff Horn, locking horns, duking it out, doing battle inside the boxing ring. And ESPN had Stephen A. Smith as a correspondent for the boxing fight in the studio in ESPN studios in Bristol, Connecticut. And Stephen A. Smith made a few statements last night that completely blew my mind, that really showed his unintelligence in both boxing and MMA. Something that I honestly feel, my true heart of hearts, that I have more intelligence than he does. I'm just a fan. This isn't even what I do for I don't get a paycheck to be on, like he does, to be on ESPN. He is paid by ESPN to be a credible, news source or to be a credible analyst, I should say. And he is not. He is far from it. He shouldn't cover boxing. He shouldn't cover MMA. It's painfully obvious that he is terrible at covering both sports, and he has very limited knowledge in comparison to a Max Kellerman or a Jim Lampley or a Joe Rogan or a Jimmy Smith or even a Mike Goldberg. And I'm not throwing shade at Goldberg by saying that, but guys that actually analyze the sports of boxing and MMA in comparison to reporters that just are loudmouths that cover it based on the fact that ESPN has nobody else to put in that seat. It was very, very mind-blowing to me that Stephen A. Smith said, you don't see bad decisions like this in MMA. Well, clearly Stephen A. Smith has not watched much of the sport of mixed martial arts within the last maybe 10 years. He's a bandwagon fan that has just jumped on while everyone has already been enjoying the parade. It has been very annoying to watch Stephen A. Smith on ESPN First Take. It has been extremely annoying to watch Skip Bayless on Fox Sports 1 talk about mixed martial arts as if they've been fans of the sport for the last 10 years when they've just jumped on the bandwagon within the last year or so. I cannot stand it. Stephen A. Smith says, we've seen fights, we haven't seen this in MMA. Watch a few of Frankie Edgar's fights. Watch a few of Jose Aldo's fights. Watch a few of Anthony Pettis' fights. Just watch more MMA. You will definitely see more cases of bad judging in the sport of mixed martial arts because the judges are so uneducated, so green about the sport of MMA that they come from the corrupt, despicable, disgusting sport that is boxing to the sport of mixed martial arts to judge these fights, and they are so in the clouds about the sport of MMA. It is so apparent to the public now more than ever, more now than it ever was before. So Stephen A. Smith needs to really need to get somebody else in that seat. If Max Kellerman works for HBO and ESPN, why would they not have Max Kellerman in the studio for the Pacquiao fight? Why would they have Stephen A. Smith in the studio for the Pacquiao fight when Max Kellerman has worked for their HBO boxing for at least 25 years? Blows my mind. More on the actual reffing of the fights. Last night with Pacquiao and Horn, the only thing that Horn was able to successfully land on Pacquiao, the only way I should say that Horn was able to successfully land on Pacquiao was by clinching Pacquiao. Anytime he clinched Pacquiao and threw punches and the punches landed, he was able to land because he was in close proximity clinching Pacquiao. Besides that, he landed virtually no punches in the fight. And obviously, as I alluded to in the last edition of the Thomas Take, I got the punch stats right here. He landed 15% of his punches, 92 out of 625. Power punches, 17%, 73 out of 428. Jabs is even worse, 19% out of 197, a 10% clip. Manny had him 32 to 15, 31 to 10, and 32 to 17. Obviously, it wasn't Manny Pacquiao's highest ratio of landed punches, but in comparison to Jeff Horn, you bet your ass it was. So, what are these judges watching? What are they watching? We've seen this with Manny tons of times before, with Tim Bradley, with Juan Manuel Marquez. Even in victory, Manny Pacquiao hasn't been given the rounds in which that he actually won in his fights throughout his fighting career. Reffing in MMA has gotten even worse. Big John McCarthy, really the only reliable ref outside of Big John, and obviously Herb Dean has been as well, but even Herb Dean has had some slip-ups recently. Mario Yamasaki, Michael Chiesa versus Kevin Lee. Michael Chiesa is, getting choked, has not tapped yet, no sign of a tap, brings his arm up to tap. He did not tap officially. His legs did go limp. Kevin Lee lets go of the choke due to the fact that Mario Yamasaki stops the bout. And we have Kevin Lee as the victor. But Michael Chiesa never tapped. So why would Mario Yamasaki stop the fight when Chiesa had never even tapped? And Mario Yamasaki is a veteran in the game, a supposed veteran in the MMA reffing scene. So this is a double whammy for the sport of mixed martial arts. Reffing in boxing, you go back to Floyd Mayweather versus Victor Ortiz. The ref's job is to tell both fighters to touch gloves and then put his arm in the middle of both fighters and tell them to continue. Joe Cortez made both Victor Ortiz and Floyd Mayweather touch gloves. They touched gloves. Then they parted. And Victor Ortiz was waiting for the green light from the ref as he stepped out of the meeting between Mayweather and Ortiz. And Floyd Mayweather sucker punched Victor Ortiz to his first knockout victory probably since 1995. So without that sucker punch victory by Floyd Mayweather, he wouldn't have a knockout victory in over 20 years. So let's really get down to the brass tacks of it. When ESPN puts up graphics below Manny Pacquiao stating that he had not knocked out an opponent since 2009, the guy that you laud as the number one pound-for-pound best fighter in boxing, the guy that's fighting an MMA fighter for his record-breaking 50th victory inside the boxing ring, hasn't knocked out a boxer in almost 20 years. Over 20 years. I think it was 1997, if I'm not mistaken. Let me look this up real quick. I'm pretty sure it was 1997, which would be 20 years. 2 decades. You know how much the world has changed in 2 decades? What the hell? I could not believe that ESPN put that graphic below Manny Pacquiao. Yeah, Manny Pacquiao hasn't knocked out many fighters in the last, 6-7 years. But guess what? Neither has Floyd in the last 20 years. So let's get down to it. I'm looking at Floyd Mayweather's record right now. Obviously, a lot of green, a lot of victories in the case of Floyd. Not a lot of knockouts. 49-0, 23 knockouts, I believe. Maybe 26. It's somewhere in the 20s. So let's see here. Let's see. 49 wins, 26 knockouts, 23 decisions. Okay, so let's go to his last knockout versus Victor Ortiz, the sucker punch 4th round KO, September 17th, 2011. That put him at 42-0. He had the TKO to Ricky Hatton, who I call him Ricky Fatten because he disappeared off the face of the earth after that fight. the last flash, I think Ricky Hatton was the fight where Ricky Hatton ran into the turnbuckle. I believe that was the last fight. Sharmba Mitchell in 2005, a TKO. I mean, realistically, the last time he flush knocked someone out, I'm looking back, and it has been at least since this millennium began. Since he flush, one punch knocked somebody out. So for ESPN to post that graphic stating 2009, I mean, what the hell? It just shows ESPN has been declining in ratings more than ever, and it's only going to continue because these networks do not have the intelligence to talk about boxing because they're not boxing networks. They're sports networks. HBO is a boxing network. Showtime is a boxing network. They are qualified. They put qualified people in place like Jim Lampley, Max Kellerman, Mauro Ranallo to talk about these fights. The Teddy Atlases of the world, who, yes, he was on ESPN Boxing last night. One of the few remaining gems that the sport of boxing still has. So, all in all, I went on a bit of a rant there, but reffing in MMA is very bad outside of Big John, and in the occasional case, Herb Dean. Realistically, reffing has been terrible in MMA for the last 5 years, especially. And in the case of boxing, the reffing has been bad, and in the case of both sports, judging has been bad. If Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless dedicated, maybe a day of their time to go back and watch the history of the sport before they cover it in terms of MMA, they would know that. Take care, everybody. That was the Thomas Take. Thanks for tuning in.